Good morning, everyone. If you are looking for the adoption of HL7 gender harmony data elements in the AU base and AU core national FHIR implementation guides, you're in the right place. My name is Ruben Daniels. I am the Deputy FHIR Product Director in HL7 International, and I guess for the purposes of this presentation, I will also reveal that I'm one of the co-leads of the Gender Harmony project as of the beginning of this year. I'll hand over to Danielle to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, Danielle Tavares-Rixon. I'm a FHIR lead for Sparked, which is Australia's national FHIR accelerator, and I'm also a primary author for most of the AU FHIR standards, AU base, AU core, going into AUE requesting.
Great. So these are the topics we're presenting on today. So as you can see, there's quite a lot for us to get through, and so we might push through as best we can, try to be as clear as possible. We do have quite a bit to tell you about. I will add there'll be questions at the end, and please reach out to Danielle or I either at this conference or in the weeks following. Our details are at the back, and this presentation's on Hoover, so we look forward to hearing from you. Right, so we want to kick off by just giving everyone who might not be familiar with the Gender Harmony IG from HL7 a quick overview on what it is. Firstly, it's a universal realm, meaning it's applicable anywhere in the world, and it's also cross paradigm, meaning it's applicable to all HL7's primary standards, them being V2, CDA, and FHIR. It focuses on providing guidance on how to exchange clinical sex and gender affirming information. It was developed by the Terminology Infrastructure Workgroup and in fact had 6 co-sponsoring HL7 workgroups, which I think might be some kind of record, including patient care, patient administration, and various others. The IG really focuses on providing a well-defined logical model of data elements along with terminology and guidance and use cases. I find it quite interesting, just following yesterday's Women on FHIR discussion, that this is an example of something where there wasn't actually a lot of guidance in EHRs, and HL7, being an interoperability standards organization, actually took it upon themselves to try and solve this problem, not just for interoperability, but arguably for EHRs themselves. Additionally, the IG summarizes and references specifications which address adoption in V2, CDA, and FHIR. And in FHIR, those gender harmony data elements can be implemented through a combination of the core standard extensions in the Extensions Pack and the terminology.hl7.org artifacts. I'm going to give you a quick run through of the data elements. Look, certainly by the time I get to the last two, it might be a little bit much to take in, but try your best and ask questions at the end. The first 3 are fairly self-explanatory. Name to use is the name that someone would prefer to be addressed by. Pronouns, again, self-explanatory. Gender identity is an individual person's sense of being man, woman, boy, girl, non-binary, or something else. Very important to note there, that needs to come from the consumer themselves, and there can be no assumptions made or rules around terminology about subsumption, etc. It's what the person says, that's the bottom line. The next one is the sex parameter for clinical use. In essence, this data element recognizes that medicine in all its centuries of history has been predicated on 2 categories, male and female, and care has been predicated on that. This data element recognizes that medicine up until now has been defined that way and allows you to assert which of those 2 applies to a particular clinical intervention. And lastly, recorded sex or gender is a tricky one to understand at first, but in essence what it is the fact that to date, most gender and sex information is captured in a single field, which needs to double for both someone's sex parameter for clinical use or their actual gender identity, and thus is unreliable. This is a means of asserting that that's what it is. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Danielle to talk about the Australian specifications.
Thank you. Clicker. Excellent.
Yep.
Okay, so just again, heads up, I come from Sparked, FHIR lead for that, the national accelerator in Australia. Our adoption of gender harmony and taking that through both our CDIs and our core spec is largely being driven through the accelerator. Not to say we don't already have adoption of some sex and gender concepts, as really every domain does, because again, medical information is largely predicated also on those for like reference ranges and so forth, but the reimagining of those through a formal adoption and alignment with international concepts is happening through our international space, basically. And I went in possibly the wrong direction. Aha, this is our context. Okay, so our context within Australia, and I don't know if you went to our panel yesterday, but for a lot of affiliates, certainly within Australia, we care greatly not just about harmonisation internally, but harmonisation internationally and upstream. So within our context in particular, we're calling out here that obviously the FHIR standard is in which what we're working. That's why we're here today. We're about FHIR. This is about DevDays. And in Australia, we have a base and a core. Not every jurisdiction does. Some just have cores. I'll talk about those a bit more in just a second. But just to give you a bit of context, our base is definitional. So we just define Australian realm concepts in a base. It's like an addition to the FHIR standard. So there's no like prescriptive obligations on it. It's just a definition of some concepts, terminology, extension pack. Our core does what cores do. They apply a minimum set of requirements around core digital health and administrative data. Our CDI is driving our clinical priorities, and so that's saying from a clinician perspective, here's what we care about. That's relevant from gender because that is coming from our clinicians on which aspects of gender, be they sex at birth, be that gender identity and so forth, are viewed as the clinical priorities we're looking in clinical information systems in Australia. And that's driving which parts of gender harmony are we adopting for use in Australia in all use cases. So we're taking gender harmony, we're looking at how we localise that in our definitional space, that's base, and then in our core implementation guide, which is driving the obligations for all clinical systems in Australia. How do we actually do that? What do you have to do? So that's our context. So actually, I think I've probably covered that, so we'll just skip past this side in the interest of getting into some more nitty-gritty detail. And I'll pass to you, Ruben, to talk about this part.
Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, this is really why are we doing this? And there are three key reasons. First of all, legislation, and I'm sure many of you might relate to this one. Increasingly in Australia at the state, territory and federal levels, we have human rights laws which legally oblige public and private health services to capture and respect gender identity and pronoun information. The state I'm from in Queensland is also changing birth certificate laws at the moment, allowing anyone to change their birth certificate to reflect their gender identity and in fact their parents' gender identities if appropriate. So there are legal obligations and legal action that can arise from non-compliance. The big one for me is really safety. Consumer safety concerns by not capturing and sharing and meaningfully use this information is increasing, particularly in young Australians who are at and it's really shocking statistics, increased risks of wanting to self-harm, actual self-harm, reckless behavior, suicidal thoughts, and suicide attempts. From the clinician perspective, there's research backing up the fact that these problems are leading to individuals not actually seeking out healthcare when they need it from the health system. So there are major safety risks associated by not doing this. And lastly, we have opportunity here. The development of these new national specifications in the AUCDI, AU Base and AU Core does present us with an opportunity to, for once, not kick the can down the road and make it someone else's problem, but to really embrace the problem. And fortunately for us, gender harmony exists as we embark on this. And so we've got a foundation to actually start doing this in Australia. Back to Danielle.
Thanks, Ruben. I'll take that clicker. Yeah. Okay, so contextualizing the diagram I just had on gender harmony, we have, again, that approach between base and core, which is actually slightly difficult for us in gender harmony, which is to say that gender harmony IG being fantastic is incredibly comprehensive, but we only have clear national drivers for parts of it. So in terms of trying to adopt and define it, that's left us, I guess, with some problems around trying to pick the parts of gender harmony we can get enough national agreement, consensus and implementation on in order to do that. We have direct drivers through AUCDI and AU Core. Our AUCDI, so our clinical priorities from our clinician group, which has over 400 members, has given us the fact that we need pronouns, sex at birth, and gender identity. And they're our first release. They're the things that are driving us. What we've ended up adopting is this. So in base, we've gone across what are the person resources, practitioner, patient, related person, and given us gender identity, pronouns, and recorded sex at gender. Recorded sex and or, aha. But in our core, that's only translated to be patient for us. So again, our core is setting implementation directives, obligations on clinical information systems. So that's where we get that scope difference. And sex at birth is represented as a profile of recorded sex or gender. A lot of this was relatively easy for pronouns or gender identity. This is a common concept. We've been doing it for years before gender harmony came out. So that was relatively easy to drive through national standards and adoption. Talking about recorded sex or gender has taken more time because the idea of recorded sex or gender is this new conceptualization and grouping of a whole set of things people might have been dealing with or otherwise. So introducing that and how do you deal with it has been a much longer journey. The only thing we're currently interested in core, because that's driven by our CDI, is sex at birth. So we've profiled person recorded sex or gender extension to say, this is what you need to support in order to give us sex at birth. And I'm just going to skip past that and go to the specifics. So how we've localised this in Australia is there are core FHIR extensions, so they're in their extension pack for the gender harmony concepts. So pronouns, gender identity, recorded sex or gender, and the others we haven't adopted, like SPCU, sex parameter for clinical use. They're all in the core extensions pack. We've just adopted those in our base profiles and we've localised the terminology. So the terminology in the core FHIR extensions either comes as preferred or example. We have adopted that plus added further ones. We have used these in Australia for quite some time, and what we've taken in now are usually from like the data absent code system to represent like workflows of when data is missing or when it's not available or those sorts of things to add into the value set. So that's what we're looking at. We are doing something a little bit different in recorded sex or gender. So that one's a bit early maturity for us. I think we need to go through a much more testing cycle on this one to work out where we are on that. Some stuff's obvious. Some stuff we've actually gone and created some Australian code systems to trial out where we think we need this to support the values. This is kind of new for us to say, I'm getting a value of sex or gender and it's coming from my national health record. I don't know which one it is. And so that's what we're trying to represent, is that's what's coming to you because you're actually accessing something from a national health record. That's not in core FHIR International yet. We're going to have to trial whether or not this is actually a good use and whether or not it works for us. And then I think we'll want to actually uplift that terminology into international and suggest that to them if it's working.
I'll make one point on that, Danielle.
Okay.
I'll hand back the mic to you. Look, in addition to everything Danielle said about RSG being going to be a bit of a trial for a little while, I would say that ultimately our goal is to not need it anymore. Where we want to get to is a situation where nobody's capturing gender identity and sex in the same field, so it's not reliable for either one. We want to get to a point where it's really just people's gender identity so that we know how to address them and respectfully, and sex parameter for clinical use when we need it.
Agreed. So just quickly, before we get to questions, because again, we could talk so much about this because we've done a lot in this space, so many meetings on it. That's what it looks like in base. We've just literally gone, here's the extensions from FHIR. We've currently got the terminology supported as invariants. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm not sure we'll keep it that way. That's core. So you can see we're bringing in must support. We've got our obligations that describe what we do for data access in terms of requesting and responding to that. And here's our profile of sex at birth. Basically, that's a profile of the international core extension for person recorded sex or gender. We've set the type to be a SNOMED code for biological sex at birth. Our value set is biological sex. This isn't a new value set for us. We've been recording biological sex like this for a while. This is at least partially aligned to the US, and I say partially aligned because now everything's behind VSAC, and as a non-US person, I can't actually access it. So I know that we have the same codes for male and female, but I'm not actually sure if the rest of it aligns. I'll work out it. That's just what it looks like in the code. And I only included this to just draw people's attention to the fact that what we were doing was a profile in the extension. It's the same extension URL, right? This is not changing that. Anyone who can cope with this extension can read this internationally. We're not redefining that. We're just placing the rules on this is the way you share this information when it's sex at birth. Okay? So that was the technical part, and now we're just going to go on, what did we have challenges and so forth. But we might also open up for questions at this point while we go forwards, because I realise we're coming up to time. Sorry.
All right, challenges. We're not going to spend too much time on any one of these points, but just want to highlight them, just might stir some thoughts you may have for questions. Issues with the Gender Harmony Extension Pack extensions. When we first had a look at that, we found some issues with it, and thankfully we were able to resolve them with HL7 International, and the key takeaway there is you need to be involved in HL7 at this stage anyway. These things are nowhere near FMM level 5. It's trial use, and we're trialing. So stay engaged with the Gender Harmony project if you're interested in undertaking this path. Building consensus across clinical and technical groups, I think everyone can probably relate to that. This is fairly new territory. These are new data elements. Not everyone's been on the journey of the Gender Harmony project, or Danielle and I and our groups. So you need to bring people on that journey. Aligning stakeholder needs and timing with Gender Harmony adoption. Most of Australia right now is capturing this stuff in a single field in most patient administration systems or EHRs. And changing those systems, especially in government, can be tricky and difficult. Fortunately, as I said, the drivers are very strong and everyone is open to change. Legacy data obviously is predominantly RSG, but typically used for both, and also as a sex parameter for clinical use. We've got to deal with that as best we can. Gender Harmony is obviously way ahead of the game. Things like RSG and sex parameter for clinical use takes time to get people's head around. They do eventually. You've just got to be patient and, as I said, bring people on the journey. And obviously, sex parameter for clinical use is, I don't want to use the word controversial, because I think once that thing clicks, people start to get it. But it is such a sea change or paradigm shift for most people in terms of their workflows. You know, we're keeping working at it. We haven't quite put it into any of these specifications yet. But as I said, it's about the journey and bringing people on that journey. Progress, Danielle.
I think we do, and we should go to questions now.
So one thing I just want to clarify, is this in the context of FHIR R4 or? Okay. And so one thing I wanted to understand, that if I look at patient resource in R4, there is a section on patient gender and sex. Somehow in that context, they're saying record that as an observation, right? But I think the difference here is that you are basically adding that to the patient resource itself and not saying that use observation to record this information.
Hang on. No, it's back. So in terms of additional content, so including the Gender Harmony IG talks about the fact that you need to make a choice between whether you record some of this information as a separate observation, which gives you some valuable things, right? It gives you who recorded this, it gives you some date, time, some of that context, or you can choose to support it as an extension. Noting that because Core FHIR in and of itself has those extensions, choosing to record things differently does impede, I guess, that international interoperability. So what used to exist with a gender identity extension anyway, like the things around the possibility for sex at birth and so forth, that's quite new. But we always knew we were going to do gender identity through an extension because that's how the core FHIR standard has produced it. We used to in Australia have an observation. We've moved away from that. The reason we've moved away from it is that we're going to keep observations to be the things that we don't always want to keep associated with the patient record. And so therefore we also want to track some things over time. And we have made the decision in Australia that the core FHIR extensions and the ability to associate them with a single patient record suits us.
I'll just add 2 points to that. Gender harmony is supported by FHIR 5 as well. And secondly, we also, as a design principle, want to ensure that what we do in Australia aligns as best as possible with other national IGs, including US Core, and US Core is adopting gender harmony increasingly as well.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, all we have time for, but of course now you know the faces and you can still ask them questions during the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Contact details. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.